It was only a wedding photo until you zoomed in on the bride's hand and uncovered a dark secret. The afternoon light slipped through the tall windows of the Atlanta Historical Archive as Dr. Rebecca Morrison carefully reviewed a collection of early 20th century photographs donated by an anonymous estate, mixed among faded portraits and formal group images. One picture made her stop cold, a wedding photograph from 1903. A white man in a dark three-piece suit sat stiffly beside a black woman in an elaborate white wedding dress. Their hands were clasped between them in what should have been a symbol of unity. Rebecca's 15 years as a historical archivist had trained her to spot details that didn't belong. This photograph felt wrong on many levels. In 1903, Georgia, interracial marriage wasn't just frowned upon, it was illegal. The state's anti-miscegenation laws, in place since 1750 and strengthened after the Civil War, made such unions criminal, punishable by prison. Yet here was photographic proof of what looked like exactly that. She marked the photograph for high-resolution scanning, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that held her. 2 weeks later, while reviewing the digital files, Rebecca slowly zoomed in on different details. The studio backdrop, the woman's jewelry, the man's hard expression. Then she focused on their joined hands. As she increased the magnification, her blood went cold. The bride's fingers were not simply resting. They were carefully arranged in a distress signal, her thumb and index finger forming a subtle but clear plea for help. Rebecca's hand shook as she zoomed in more. The woman's fingers were placed with clear purpose, hidden inside what looked like a wedding pose, but actually crying out for rescue. This was not just an illegal marriage, it was proof of something far more disturbing. A silent scream had been frozen in time for 120 years, waiting for someone to finally see it and understand what it meant. Rebecca immediately contacted Dr. Marcus Williams, a specialist in African American history and Jim Crow-era records. When he arrived at her office that evening, she showed him the photograph without saying a word. Marcus studied it in silence, his face growing more troubled. "This shouldn't exist," he finally said. "Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws in 1903 made this impossible. Unless what?" Rebecca asked, even though she feared the answer. Marcus leaned back, his face dark. "Unless this wasn't a legal marriage at all. Unless this photograph shows something else entirely. Coercion, captivity, or worse. Look at her face. That's not a bride's expression. That's fear being barely held in." They spent hours studying every detail. The studio stamp read Morrison and Wright Portrait Studio, Atlanta, Georgia, August 1903. A faint note on the back said only, "Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant, not wife, not bride, servant." The word hung between them like a curse. "He didn't even try to hide what she was to him," Marcus said quietly. "This photograph was never meant to record a marriage. It was meant to show ownership." Rebecca felt sick. But why the wedding dress? Why stage it like this? Marcus pulled up historical records on his laptop. Control, humiliation. Some white men during this time used their power over black women in unspeakable ways. They could not legally marry them, but they could still force them into situations that looked like marriage, a twisted imitation that satisfied their desires while protecting their social image. The woman had no rights, no protection, no escape. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the woman's face, her carefully placed fingers, the silent scream that had traveled across more than a century. Who was she? What happened to her? And most haunting of all, did anyone see her signal at the time, or did it stay invisible until now, far too late to save her? The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus began their search at the Georgia State Archives. They needed to identify both people in the photo. The name Charles Whitfield was their starting point. The archivist, an elderly black woman named Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who had worked there for 35 years, grew tense when she heard the name. "Charles Whitfield," she repeated slowly. "That's a name that still carries weight in certain circles, though not the kind anyone should be proud of." She disappeared into the records room and returned with several boxes. The Whitfield family had been prominent in Atlanta from the 1870s through the 1920s. They built their fortune in cotton and textiles after the war. Charles Whitfield took over the family business in 1898. The 1900 census showed Charles Whitfield, age 28, living in a large house on Peachtree Street with great wealth and many servants listed in his home. Rebecca's stomach tightened as she read the names, all black women and girls ages ranging from 14 to 30. One entry stood out. Louisa, age 16, domestic servant, literate. Marcus found property records showing Whitfield owned several buildings around Atlanta, including a textile factory where he employed dozens of workers, mostly black women and children, working in harsh conditions for very low pay. Newspaper articles from the time praised him as a progressive employer and a pillar of the community. The gap between his public image and what they were uncovering was sickening. They searched for more information about the woman in the photograph. Since she was listed only as servant, not by name, finding her identity would be difficult. But Mrs. Hayes had an idea. If the photo was taken in August 1903, they should check city records for missing persons or unusual reports around that time. Sometimes families tried to report when their daughters vanished, even though police rarely acted. After 2 days of digging through broken and incomplete records, Marcus found a police report from September 1903. It was short and dismissive, but it gave them their first real lead. Report filed by Henry and Martha Johnson regarding their daughter, Louisa Johnson, age 19, employed in the household of Charles Whitfield. Family claims she has not been seen in over a month, despite living just 2 miles away. Mr. Whitfield states Miss Johnson is fulfilling her contracted duties and is in good health. No evidence of wrongdoing. Case closed. Rebecca cross-checked the name with the 1900 census. There she was, Louisa Johnson, age 16 in 1900, living with her parents and 3 younger siblings, in a modest home near Auburn Avenue. Her father, Henry, worked as a carpenter. Her mother, Martha, as a launderer. The family was literate and owned their small home. They were part of Atlanta's growing black middle class trying to build a life despite the heavy weight of Jim Crow. Marcus found more records. In 1902, Henry Johnson had been hurt in a construction accident and could no longer work. The family fell into debt. A note in a local church's charity records showed they had asked for help in early 1903. "This is how it happened," Marcus said, his voice thick with anger and sadness. Whitfield saw a chance, a family in trouble, a young woman with no options. He offered a job, probably promised good pay. Then they found a letter in the church records written by Martha Johnson to the pastor in July 1903. "We have not seen our Louisa in 3 weeks. Mr. Whitfield says she is well and working hard, but he will not let us visit her. He says it would disturb the household routine. Reverend, my heart tells me something is wrong. My daughter writes to us every week without fail, but we have received no letters. When I went to his house, the servants would not look at me. Please, can you help us?" The pastor's reply was written in his journal. "Spoke with Mr. Whitfield regarding the Johnson girl. He assured me she is healthy and content, simply busy with her duties. He expressed annoyance at the family's concerns and suggested they are being ungrateful for his generosity in employing her. I am inclined to believe him. The Johnsons must trust in God's providence and not cause trouble for a prominent gentleman who has shown them Christian charity." Rebecca then traced the Morrison and Wright portrait studio records through the Georgia Historical Society. The studio had operated from 1895 to 1910, and amazingly, some materials had been saved by the photographer's descendants. She contacted James Morrison, the great-grandson of William Morrison, the studio's founder. James invited them to his home in Decatur, where he kept a large archive of his great-grandfather's work. William Morrison photographed Atlanta society for 15 years, James explained, leading them to his study. He kept detailed journals about his clients and his work. He was also quietly the son of an abolitionist and struggled with photographing the darker side of Southern life. James pulled out a leather journal from August 1903. "I've read all of these over the years. Some entries stayed with me. This is one of them." He opened to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read. August 17, 1903. "Today I perform perhaps the most disturbing task of my career. Charles Whitfield ordered a wedding portrait, but there was no wedding. The young Negro woman he brought to the studio was clearly not there of her own will. She wore an expensive gown that did not fit properly, and her eyes held such deep fear that I nearly refused the job. The entry continued. W. Whitfield insisted on posing them as a married couple with their hands joined. The woman, he never used her name, only called her girl, began to shake when he grabbed her hand. I noticed bruises on her wrists as I positioned them for the photograph. When I looked into her eyes to make sure she faced the camera correctly, I saw desperation there. She was trying to tell me something, but with Whitfield watching her every move, she could not speak. James turned the page, his voice tight. As I prepared the exposure, I noticed her fingers moving slightly, shifting into what looked like a deliberate pattern, a signal perhaps. I said nothing, but I made sure to capture it clearly. I took 3 exposures. Whitfield wanted to be certain he got a perfect image. After they left, I felt physically sick. I knew what I had photographed was not a wedding. It was proof of something criminal. But what could I do? Report it to the police? They would laugh at me for suggesting a white man of Whitfield's standing had done anything wrong. Marcus widened the investigation to study Whitfield's past more fully. What they uncovered was a pattern of abuse that stretched across many years. Through court files, property papers, and old newspaper archives, a disturbing picture slowly formed. Between 1899 and 1905, at least 6 families had filed complaints about daughters who had gone to work for Whitfield and then disappeared from contact with their families. Each case followed the same path. A black family facing money trouble. A young woman, usually between 16 and 20, hired as domestic help. Early letters home that suddenly stopped. Family members turned away when they tried to visit. Police repo, RTS filed and quickly dismissed. In 2 cases, the young women later returned months afterward, refusing to talk about what happened, their spirits clearly broken. Rebecca found testimony from a woman named Sarah, who had worked for Whitfield in 1901. She had given a statement to a black community group that recorded abuse by white employers, a record kept outside official systems because official systems refused to hear such complaints. Mr. Whitfield kept 3 of us in the house, Sarah stated. We were never allowed to leave. He told us if we tried, he would have our families arrested for theft or our fathers lynched. He did whatever he wanted to us. We were his property in everything but name. The testimony continued. There was a girl there when I arrived. Couldn't have been more than 16. She was kept in a room on the 3rd floor and we weren't allowed to speak to her. I heard her crying at night. After a few weeks, she disappeared. Mr. Whitfield said she had stolen from him and run away, but I knew better. She wouldn't have left. She was too afraid of what he would do to her family. I got out because my brother threatened to make noise and go to the newspapers. Whitfield let me go rather than risk attention, but I know others weren't so lucky. Marcus found records showing Whitfield had strong connections to local police and city officials. He made regular political donations and hosted social gatherings for Atlanta's elite. He had complete protection, Marcus said bitterly. The system shielded him, the police served him, the courts favored him, and black families had no real power. Their daughters could be taken, abused, even killed, and there was nothing I could do about it. Despite the darkness of what they were uncovering, Rebecca stayed focused on Louisa herself. The photograph showed more than victimhood. It showed resistance. The hand signal frozen in that image was an act of defiance, a refusal to let her captivity go unrecorded. She knew, Rebecca said while studying the photo again. She knew that picture might be the only proof, so she left a message. Through Martha Johnson's letters to churches and organizations, they followed the family's desperate search for their daughter. In October 1903, Henry Johnson, despite his injuries, tried to force his way into Whitfield's house. He was arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace and spent 2 weeks in jail. The incident made the newspapers, but the coverage fully supported Whitfield, prominent businessman harassed by deranged former employee's relative. Martha wrote to the NAACP's Atlanta chapter, newly formed in 1903. My daughter is being held against her will by Charles Whitfield. She came to his home as an employee and is now his prisoner. I have not seen her in 4 months. She would never abandon her family by choice. Please, someone must help us. We have used every legal way and no one will listen because we are Negro and he is white and wealthy. The NAACP responded, but their effort met the same barriers. Their lawyer, a black man named Robert Foster, tried to obtain a writ of habeas corpus. The judge refused, saying there was no proof of illegal detention and suggesting the Johnson family was making wild claims against a respected man to try to get money. Foster documented the case but could go no further without risking his safety and career. Then, Marcus found something unexpected. A letter dated December 1903 from a white woman named Eleanor Hartwell, Whitfield's neighbor. She wrote to her sister in Boston, "There is something deeply troubling happening next door. Charles Whitfield has a young Negro woman in his house whom he claims is a servant. The situation seems far more sinister. I have seen her only once looking out from an upper window. Her face was bruised. I tried to speak with her when Charles was away, but the other servants refused to let me in, clearly afraid. I am thinking of reporting this, but I fear no one will believe me or care." The trail of Louisa's story went cold after December 1903, and Rebecca feared the worst. Then Marcus found something in an unexpected place, the records of Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. In March 1904, a woman named Louisa had been admitted with serious injuries, brought in by members of a black mutual aid society who found her near a train station. The hospital notes were brief but revealing. Female patient approximately 20 years of age. Gave name as Louisa but refused surname. Multiple injuries in different stages of healing, including broken ribs, cuts, and signs of long-term physical abuse. Patient extremely traumatized and barely speaks. Shows deep fear of men, especially white men. Patient states she escaped from somewhere in Georgia but will not give details, saying, "He will kill my family if I tell." Rebecca's heart pounded as she read further. The hospital had contacted a local group that helped escaped women, both those fleeing the remains of slavery and those escaping abuse. A social worker named Catherine Wells took charge of Louisa's case. Her notes added more detail. This young woman has suffered unimaginable trauma. She jumps at sudden movement and has nightmares that wake the whole ward. Over several weeks she has slowly shared pieces of her story. Forced captivity, repeated assaults, isolation from her family, and constant threats against her loved ones if she tried to escape. Catherine's notes from April 1904 recorded Louisa's own words. "I was trapped in that house for 8 months. He took everything from me, my freedom, my dignity, my connection to my family. The photograph he forced me to take in that white dress was the worst day. He wanted to pretend I was his wife, that I had chosen to be there, but I made sure to leave a message in that picture. I moved my fingers just right, a distress signal I had read about in a book. I didn't know if anyone would ever see it, but I had to try. I needed there to be proof that I hadn't gone willingly." The record showed Catherine helped Louisa contact her family through carefully coded messages to avoid alerting Whitfield. In May 1904, Louisa's mother, Martha, received a letter. "Mama, I am alive. I cannot tell you where I am, only that I am safe now and healing. The man who held me believes I am dead. Please let him continue to believe that. It is the only way to keep you and father and my brothers and sisters safe. I will write again when I can. I love you. Your daughter." Marcus found the final piece in Atlanta newspaper archives from March 1904. A small article reported, "Fire at Whitfield residence claims life." Authorities report that a tragic fire occurred at the home of prominent businessman Charles Whitfield last evening. One servant perished in the blaze. Mr. Whitfield stated that the young Negro woman, whose name was not recorded, had been careless with a cooking fire. The body was too badly burned for identification. The incident is considered a tragic accident. But a black newspaper, the Atlanta Independent, told a different version in careful wording. Sources within the Negro community report that the servant who allegedly died in the recent fire at the Whitfield home had in fact escaped weeks earlier. Several witnesses report seeing a young woman matching her description fleeing the property in February. The fire appears to have been set to hide the fact of her escape and to frighten other potential witnesses. Police have declined to investigate further. Louisa had escaped, and Whitfield covered it up by claiming she died in a fire. He could not admit she had gotten away without exposing the truth of her captivity. To protect his image, he created a fouls death and moved on. For the Johnson family, this meant they could never publicly admit their daughter was alive without putting her in danger. Rebecca and Marcus found letters between Martha Johnson and Catherine Wells that lasted for years. Catherine helped Louisa build a new life in Washington, D.C. under a different name. She found work as a seamstress and later trained as a nurse. She married a kind man named Edward, a postal worker, in 1908. They had 4 children, but Louisa never returned to Atlanta. Her parents had to pretend their daughter was dead to keep her safe. Marcus discovered Louisa kept her story alive in another way. In 1925, she gave testimony to a commission studying racial violence and exploitation in the South. She did not use her real name, but she told her story. I was 19 when a white man took me from my family and held me captive for 8 months. He could do this because the law did not protect people who looked like me. He knew no one would believe me. He knew my family had no power to save me. But I survived, and I want my story on record so that someday, when the world is ready to hear it, people will know what happened to women like me. Rebecca and Marcus spent 6 months turning their findings into full historical documentation. They traced Louisa's descendants through Washington, D.C. records and found her great-great-granddaughter, Dr. Michelle Foster, a professor of African American history at Howard University. When Rebecca called her, Michelle's response was immediate and emotional. "We have been waiting for someone to find this story." They met at Michelle's home, where she had saved everything Louisa left behind. "My great-great-grandmother lived until 1978, Michelle explained. She was 94 years old, and she never forgot what happened in Atlanta. She told us the story when we were old enough to understand. She made us promise to protect it, to make sure it was not forgotten. She said someday, someone will find that photograph, and when they do, I want them to know the whole truth." Michelle showed them Louisa's personal papers, including a journal she kept later in life. One entry read, "I have lived a good life in spite of what was done to me. I raised 4 beautiful children. I helped bring dozens of babies into the world as a nurse. I loved and was loved, but I never forgot those 8 months, and I never forgot my parents' pain. That photograph exists somewhere with my silent scream frozen in it. I pray that one day someone will see it and understand. I pray that my story will help people see how many women suffered in silence, trapped by laws that denied our humanity, and by a society that refused to see our pain." The National Museum of African American History and Culture later organized an exhibition titled "Silent Testimony, Louisa's Story, and the Hidden History of Jim Crow Captivity." The centerpiece was the 1903 photograph displayed with the photographer's journal, hospital records, family letters, and Louisa's own testimony. The exhibition text did not soften the truth. This photograph documents not a marriage but a crime. It shows a young black woman held captive by a white man who faced no punishment because the legal and social systems of Jim Crow America gave him total protection. At the opening, Michelle stood before the photograph with tears on her face. Beside the 1903 image was a photo of Louisa from 1960, age 76, surrounded by children and grandchildren, her face calm and strong. "My great-great-grandmother survived," Michelle told the crowd. "She did more than survive. She rose above it. She turned her trauma into purpose, helping other women, raising a family, building a meaningful life." This photograph no longer shows only her captivity. It shows her resistance, her courage, and her refusal to be erased. Rebecca then spoke to the audience. For 120 years, Louisa's distress signal went unseen, but she left it there anyway, trusting that someday someone would look closely enough. Her story is not only about one woman's suffering, it is about a system that allowed abuse through racist laws and social power. It is about the countless black women who were harmed with no protection. And it is about the strength of those who survived and built lives of dignity despite everything meant to destroy them. As thousands of visitors walked through the exhibition in the months that followed, they saw Louisa's hand signal, read her story, and finally understood the truth hidden for more than a century. The photograph at last fulfilled its purpose, not as proof that could save Louisa in her own time, but as a testimony that refused to let her story disappear. Her silent scream was finally heard, and in being heard, it gave voice to countless others whose stories had been buried by history's deliberate forgetting